you so much. We definitely have learned a lot and be inspired by this very comprehensive way of discussing what are the things that in the fashion industry can do when it comes to sustainability. Next up, we're going to shift gears and to look at food tech actually. And the next panel, we're going to have our moderator joining us online to be joined by two other expert panelists to share their insights on what kind of food tech are innovators working on and what kind of impact can we expect to see. So now I would like to first of all introduce to you our moderator who will be joining us here online today, and he is Mr. Ben Wong, Head of Open Innovation of Eureka Nova. But then, before I hand the mic over to Ben, I would like to make sure we have our stage ready for our on-site guest here right now who will be joining us on stage for this panel discussion. And before that, just a quick preview of what's going to happen today. We'll have a very exciting program of different panels and speakers coming out onto the main stage. But outside of this room, we actually have a lot of exhibitions going on other rooms that you can take a look at to know more about the other startups and to know about what they're doing. Right now, let's welcome on stage our two panelists and please invite them on stage to be seated. And Ben, I'll actually hand over to you for the introduction of our speakers, all right?
Great, thank you.
All right, now over to you, Ben.
Great. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Ben Wong, Head of Open Innovation at Eureka Nova, part of the New World Group. And for the very first time, I want to say that I'm very proud to be the person that's preventing you from getting your lunch, given the topic we're about to touch on today, which is on positive impact through food tech. As many of you already know, sustainable food technology plays a key role in our lifestyles today, whether you like it or not. One of the drivers is because we're still trying to make up for the time lost in achieving our decarbonization goals to realistically curb our climate goals. The IPCC has made it very clear that for us to contain our global temperatures rise to only 1.5 degrees Celsius by the end of the century, we need to decarbonize by half within this decade. And we're nowhere close to our goal. And soon you'll hear from our panelists on why food is such a big contributor to emissions and how sustainable food technology can give us one of the biggest bang for our buck in meeting our climate goals. Joining me today, we have Manav, founder and CEO of Brink, a venture capital and accelerator that introduced Asia's first food tech accelerator, and Sonali, founder and editor in chief of Green Queen, an award-winning sustainability and impact media platform advocating for social and environmental change. Now, just to kick it off, I'll start off with Sonali. Sonali, can you please further introduce yourself and Green Queen and expand on the role that food tech has?
Yeah, absolutely. So Green Queen was Asia's real first sustainability-focused media. And about 5 years ago, we started to see that there was more and more data coming out about our global food emissions, particularly with regards to our consumption of meat and the fact that, especially here in Asia, the curves are going up in terms of meat consumption. And so we needed to be, championing and showcasing a future of food solutions that could really meet the need of a bigger demand for meat, but basically products that were not taking up so much land, water, emissions. And so we started focusing a lot of our coverage on that. And today we're one of the leading sources for alternative protein and food tech in the world. So that's really where I'm coming from. My job as editor-in-chief is really to choose the coverage in terms of what signals to market are the most important, to really kind of canvas what's going on and showcase, okay, here are some solutions that we need to be looking at, and here are the people you need to know, and here are the organizations you need to be keeping track of, and here are the trends for the decarbonization of food.
Great. And just to kind of add on to that, Sonali, you've been doing this for quite some time, covering several topics and new technologies and types of food that's being introduced to the Hong Kong market. Have you seen kind of an acceleration in this topic or general interest growing?
Absolutely. So if you think about 5 years ago, we had maybe a handful of plant-based meat companies. Today, we have over 1,000, with a very healthy amount of them in across Asia Pacific. Here in Hong Kong, we have just under 10, depending on how you classify it. But I think that's pretty strong, given that we have a smaller home market. There's also a lot going on in mainland China. Great deal going on, obviously, in Singapore, Thailand, Philippines. It is a very exciting place to be in Asia, because I think what's happened is the acceleration has happened as younger consumers across the world all agree that they want to eat less meat. And so businesses are coming up and saying, we need to meet them where they are. And in Asia, that means localizing the foods to be exciting. So this industry started out very US focused and very Europe focused a few years ago, and now it is truly a global industry. And then that's not even before we even mention things like precision fermentation and cultivated meat, which is also really, and seafood, which is also really happening across the region. And what's also been interesting being in Asia is that some of the biggest, earliest investors in food tech are actually Asia-based. The two biggest highlights would be, Horizon Ventures, based right here in Hong Kong, and Temasek, out in Singapore. So they invested in this sector almost 10 years ago. So they're very early to see the potential for supporting technologies that can really lower emissions and meet consumption demand.
Great, thank you. Manav, would you also do the same about yourself, introduce yourself as well as Brink, and if you have anything else to add to Sonali's comment, possibly on sustainable investing and why the food category is so important to Brink?
Sure, happy to. And maybe before I do that, if you haven't followed the Green Queen newsletter, you should. It's just incredible content. And their Instagram, their EDMs, everything, it's just incredible content. Sonali's done a really, really good job of curating, the best, not only founders that are building businesses, but also what's happening in the industry. And I think it's really helped everyone recognize because the narrative has now shifted, right? So as Sonali was mentioning, just a couple years ago when we first set up our Foodtech Accelerator, no one was really talking about this. And now, this entire conference is called sustainability. This is a big area of focus, and everyone's starting to recognize the importance to it. And there's incredible companies being built in Asia, incredible companies being built around the world that also want to access the Asian market. And so it's a great source to really learn more about what's actually happening on ground and what's happening also around the world. So Brink was, kind of founded on a sustainability mandate. We invest early. We invest through accelerator programs. We support companies through their kind of development hurdles. We run 15 different, programs around the world today. In Hong Kong, starting in Singapore, India, Middle East, and in numerous other locations. Our focus is to invest in companies that are trying to create a more sustainable, equitable, and inclusive world. And so food kind of ticks a lot of those boxes. It's the right solution to build a much more sustainable system. The current food system is definitely very broken. And I think the simple way to kind of look at this is animals are just not a good vehicle for transporting nutrients or transporting the amount of resources you put in to actually create an animal. You're throwing 800% of that away when you, on average, across the different types of animals before the end product reaches the source. So for beef, it's 25 calories in for 1 calorie out. For pork, it's 15 calories in for 1 calorie out. And chicken, which is the most efficient animal, is 9 calories in for 1 calorie out. So I think when we just started looking at the industry, we're like, look, animals are just not the right vehicle. They're very resource intensive. They're very damaging to the environment. They take a lot of water, a lot of land. And we just don't have the resources to feed 10 billion people by 2050. So this is really a food security issue. It's a food sustainability issue. And it's not just about animal welfare. And that's why a lot of the investors are getting involved. That's why a lot of the governments are getting involved. So, we're quite excited to support the category. We've been backing, investments in the space since 2018 when we launched our accelerator, and we've made about 50 investments in the space.
Amazing. So Sonali, did you have something to add?
No, I just want to say that, Brink was the first to recognize in the region that this was going to be a systemic issue that needed to be solved. And I think that one thing that is really missing from the sustainable food conversation is just the proportion of emissions that the food system takes up on the global stage. So most of you have most likely heard about sustainability when it comes to energy, when it comes to transportation, right? Maybe even fashion. I noticed the panel before had so many speakers, but most of you are not probably thinking daily about the connection between global emissions and food. And, the food system is responsible for, depending on which numbers you look up, from 1/3 to almost, 40% of all global emissions. Right? And out of that, meat is between 14 and 18%, right? So industrial livestock agriculture, so intense cattle farming, 14 to 18% of all global emissions. And yet, in any major sustainability event, or when you look at sustainability coverage in terms of percentages, it does not add up to the emission cost. And so this is something that all governments need to be looking at, all corporations need to be looking at. The decarbonization of the food system is one of the biggest ways we're going to fight this climate crisis. And if we don't go faster, we are going to have hungry people, and we are going to have malnourished people. And we are also going to have angry people who have maybe, especially in Asia, their incomes have risen. They are ready to, commit to more animal protein in their diet or high quality protein in their diet, and there's just not going to be enough supply because we actually don't have enough land, water, and resources today to feed the animal protein demand that is coming in 10 years because of the urbanization and development across APAC and across Africa and across Latin America, particularly with regards to certain countries in Africa, India and China, with China being the biggest market, where if another 300 million people rise up in China and they want more animal protein, we cannot meet that demand. So this is a big, big difference between what's happening in the East versus what's happening in the West, where in the West, it's a cultural issue, it's a social issue, it's a reckoning of identity, like, oh, my grandfather was a farmer and like, I don't want to take away his livelihood. But here in Asia, it's a completely different thing. It's a national food security issue. Do we have the resources to meet the demand? And I think we really need to, journalists need to be looking at this more, corporations need to be looking at this more, we need more NGOs in the space. We need it to be our own Asian narrative, which is about food security and national security.
Maybe I'll just add one more thing, Ben, if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Just to speak to that. The issue is we have land. We actually have a lot of land, but we're just not using the land efficiently. So the amount of arable land that's used for animal agriculture is crazy. It's like over 70 or 80%. I don't know if you know the stat off the top of your head, but and we use that 70 to 80% of land predominantly to create animal feed or to graze animals. And then we use that 70, 80% of the arable land, which is outside of the oceans and the mountains and so forth, to feed the urban population, which is using less than 1% of the Earth's planet in terms of actual space, which is just crazy. And on top of that, half the world, or a big portion of the world, is still malnourished and in poverty. So we just don't. It's not an efficient system in any form or manner, and it's an absolute food security issue with the population rising. If we don't address this now, there's a lot of problems coming.
Absolutely. And
the social.
Yeah, social unrest will get worse.
Exactly.
Because we also have a climate emergency that is causing extreme weather events, and the APAC region is going to have the most climate migrants of anywhere in the world. So we are actually going to pay the brunt of the cost. And that's because 60% of the world's population lives, within 5 hours of this city right here. And so we need, as in terms of central planning and national planning and state planning and corporate planning, these are actual real-time concerns. And I think the worry is especially what I see where I'm sitting, is that the worry is that this gets cloaked as some kind of, oh, let's be nice to animals and let's, let's give meat eaters a plant burger. No. We have bigger bigger issues than that. I don't want to say bigger fish to fry because we haven't even talked about the oceans and what's happening there. So we really need to see this as a protein security issue, and not so much. Sometimes I even question if the term alternative protein is the right term. In India, they say smart protein, and I think that might be the better term, because this is not a question of whether we're going to choose a conventional burger or an alternative protein burger. This is a question of we're going to need both. Even if we keep going at our current rate, we're still going to need to add on for the demand growth. So we really need to start reframing how this is looked at, and also really giving food decarbonization a lot more attention and resources.
Yeah, and just kind of keep going back on what Nav touched on earlier. The social ROI just doesn't make sense, right? I mean, I did not notice, but 25 calories in for 1 calorie out on beef, that just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But now that we know, we can see the type of impact it does have on our climate and the decarbonization targets that we need to try to achieve. So moving on to the next question, while we're all looking at investing in this space, Manav, can you share a little bit with our audience here on food technologies today that's starting to hit an inflection point, and also what we should keep our eye out for in the future?
Yeah, so I think, at least from what we've seen since we've been investing in the space for a while, I think Gen 1, when we first got involved, were kind of your basic kind of burgers, chicken nuggets, and so forth. And I think Gen 2 now is, like minced pork. You're getting a lot of kind of regional varieties, so localized products. In Asia, for example, let's say animal welfare is not as important, sustainability is not as important, but water contamination, microplastics, heavy metals in the water is important. So companies like Avant, which is one of our portfolio companies, one of the kind of Hong Kong homegrown heroes, is addressing that with an alternate or a cultivated fish product. So I think there's a lot of scope for these much more localized, regionalized, tailored products, which really expand across the profile of meat, because you don't consume meat just in a burger form, right, or a nugget form. There's just so many form factors. I think another big push, there's a lot of issues with Gen 1s more around the processing and how processed these products were. So there's a big push, and there's a lot of investment scope, I think, in clean label, investing in kind of cleaner ingredients, looking at whole food plant-based if you are going to continue to do plant-based. And then I think we're quite bullish on a lot of the tech that's being built out in the cultivated space. So one of the biggest issues right now is the cost attached to a lot of the more deep tech solutions, which are causing the price to still be unaffordable to the mass market. So we invested in a company called Clear Meat, which has helped bring down the cost of growth media by about 80%, and they're actually creating a plant-based fetal bovine serum, which is going to be a major contributor to reducing costs. So I think there's a lot of scope also in those kind of B2B technologies and enablers that will make it easier for this industry overall to gain adoption.
Can you also touch a little bit about with Clear Meat? How's Clear Meat able to drop costs by 80%?
Well, the first part is it's plant-based. So today FBS actually is they take unborn cows. So a female cow is impregnated forcefully, and then they take out the calf. And the kind of what is it called, the placenta that covers the calf is utilized as the gross media. So it's a much more expensive process, right, outside of all the kind of animal harm. And Clear Meat has done that with 100% plant-based products. So that's really on top of that, they're also creating fully vegan or fully kind of clean label cultivated product without having any animal harm, and on top of that, it's plant-based. So that's really reducing the cost.
Very cool. So Sonali, just to go back to your comments on how we label alternative protein versus smart protein. Can you expand on that a little bit more?
Absolutely. So obviously, this is a very new industry. When we started writing about it, even 5 years ago, there wasn't an umbrella term, right? There was this new food tech term. And even when it comes to cultivated meat, we've agreed on cultivated, but some people call it lab grown, some people call it cultured, some people call it cell cultured. So nomenclature is still at an early stage. Even there's a big debate around plant-based versus vegan. They mean, surprisingly to most people, they actually mean different things. And to some extent, the industry needs to figure out how to kind of name things and agree. And that's what's happened, for example, with cultivated. But with alternative proteins, I mean, we needed a term to kind of have this umbrella around non-animal or non-slaughter, really. The idea, because obviously cultivated meat is grown from an animal cell, right? So that still involves an animal. And precision fermentation uses animal DNA intelligence, right? So they're animal free in terms of that you're not killing an animal to create the product, right? But even then, terms are difficult because you have to use it in the media, you have to use it with end consumers, you have to use it with stakeholders and investors, and alternative protein is just what seems to have taken off. The biggest industry lobby group is the Good Food Institute, and they decided that alternative protein was the one to go with. But I guess for me, my pushback is, the word alternative makes people think that there's a choice and that I'm choosing this or that. And what's happened is that choice kind of like idea has been weaponized by big meat and big food, and now there's really strong lobby dollars being thrown around to fight the rise of plant-based meat. And so if any of you read like more international media, you would have seen there's a lot of hit pieces lately against plant-based meat. Oh, it's not healthy. Oh, it's processed. Oh, like nobody likes it. The sales are lagging. First of all, that's a very American-centric, US-centric rhetoric, and it does not align with what we're seeing in Asia, where actually in Asia, the plant-based meat industry is growing, and consumers are actually very open to it, and they don't see it as much as processed because Asian consumers tend to be much more aware of the negative health effects of meat. They're much more aware of the high cholesterol issues, the hormones, the contaminated water for seafood and heavy metal stuff. Whereas U.S. consumers are a bit brainwashed about the meat they consume. So they're much more likely to want to take on a rhetoric around negative, unhealthy plant-based meat. But what the word alternative has done is made people think, okay, well, there's either real meat or there's alternative meat, and I'm going to keep with my real meat because that's my identity as a red-blooded, human or whatever who loves cows. But my point earlier is that this is not an alternative protein. This is additive protein. It's very likely that in the future we will have mixed products where there'll be some cultivated fat, maybe some plant-based protein and some animal protein. And the reason for that is there's going to be a supply dry up of animal protein in terms of meeting the demand that we have today. And so I think since the industry's still early on, my take is, do we really want to keep calling it alternative and kind of infusing it with this artificial choice idea that actually doesn't exist? Because the reality is we're already doing this. In Asia, one of the most consumed products is fish balls. And actually, fish balls are already a blend of seafood, meat, and plant-based sources of protein. So this is already happening in big food. It's just a question of how we accept it and how we market it and kind of talk about it. But the reality is that, it's the same problem with seafood. We are getting to the point where seafood is just going to become more and more of a luxury, more and more expensive. Most big fish are overfished. There's huge issues with fish farming around contamination of wild populations, fish feed, disease, and so we have to be open to alternatives. And my view is, once they're accessible, once they're well tested, and once they're cheaper, and at price parity or below compared to the animal alternative, consumers are going to choose it, because look at what's happening now with rising costs, inflation, food prices are really on the up and up, energy prices across the world are going up. Actually, it is already forcing our hand in terms of what we choose at the supermarket. And so I think smart protein, alternative protein, it's just going to slot into that kind of thinking where you as a shopper are eventually going to make the choice that is the most affordable and the healthiest for your family, and that is delicious on some level. And those are the three things people are looking at. And we just have to play to that demand as an industry.
Right.
No, 100%.
Manav, we just heard that Sonali just said that in the U.S., the media has tried to portray that the market for smart alternative protein has cooled down a bit, but in Asia it does seem to still be on the up. From your standpoint as an investor, have you seen that the market has cooled down a bit, or if so, are there bottlenecks that is causing this?
Well, I think the media loves to kind of paint a narrative and jump on, the fact that one large company, Beyond Meat, has kind of dropped in stock price. I think we've just seen valuations come down to earth. They were quite inflated, and a lot of the multiples didn't make sense. Also, don't think it's fair to have the entire industry kind of branded, because based on one or two companies that are listed, it's not a fair representation of the entire industry and really the quality of work that's happening across all the different sectors, from plant to fermented to cultivated, innovations. We love when the market does cool, because from an investment perspective, it's the best time to invest. When we started investing, we were getting, very, very attractive valuations. The market heated up as we kind of went through that hype cycle, and there was a lot of excitement behind it. A lot of investors piled cash in. Valuations did get pretty high, and some cases justified, other cases perhaps not. And we're finally kind of seeing that balance out a little bit better. And so it's the best time, I think, for us from an investment perspective also to invest in the space. There's still a lot of white space. There's still incredible opportunities to, back, new kind of niche areas, novel ingredients, novel products, kind of new emerging technologies. So I would encourage others to definitely look at it, and look at the overall industry. And as Sonali was mentioning, really, this is not a problem that goes away, right? Like, this has to get addressed. So you're talking about a multi-trillion-dollar industry, and all estimates are that plant-based will play a large role, and the other categories, as they develop and reach price parity, will also start taking a big part of the market share. So we're not far off, and this is already starting to happen, and we think it's a great time to be investing in the category.
Such an important point. We got to separate the fundamentals of why investors are investing in this category, which is food security and supply chain issues around protein, versus what the media looks at as a trend, right? And those are two very different things. And yes, the market got over frothy. That happened across all categories, not just food tech. Valuations were insane. Founders were being irresponsible. VCs were being irresponsible. And what happened is you got a lot of very mediocre products sitting on shelves, mostly in the US, overcrowding supermarkets and confusing customers. But that is going to get cleared out. Again, as Manav said, the fundamental raison d'etre for this sector will not go away. The need will only increase. So let's double down on the smart companies, the good founders, and let's, arm this rocket ship, because we're going to need it so badly in about 10 to 15 years.
And we've been, investing in different tech sectors for many years, and this is a very normal process, right? Like, the industry goes through this kind of hype, and then there's this disillusionment phase, and then you kind of get to that entitlement productivity phase, and that's kind of where we're going, I think, in food tech. I was in Singapore 2 weeks ago for a token conference. We're also investing in Web3 companies. The entire industry is down, but there were 7,000 developers or 7,000 people at this conference saying, "Hey, look, we're here to build." We're both, flying out next week to another agri-food conference. There's a lot of people showing up, And so the real players, the ones that really care about this category, get it and are actually using this as an opportunity to strengthen, consolidate, and from an investment perspective, definitely get involved.
And despite what you might read in the media, both Manav and I are regularly in touch with big food, Unilever, Nestle, Danone, JBS, Tyson. They're all in this category. They get it.
Yeah.
Because for them, it's a business decision. Why did Tyson rebrand and call themselves a protein company rather than a meat company? Because at the end of the day, their job is to supply protein to people. It doesn't really matter to them at the end of the day where that protein comes from, as long as they can give their shareholders profit. So the industry, I would say, is around, if you compare it to the e-commerce world, this is around like the 2000s for where e-commerce was. So we've had a big hype, big coming out party for 2 years. And now, the crappy guests are going home, and it's going to be a bit of a rejig. But again, we knew the internet was going to happen, and because we needed it, and it's a great framework, and it's exactly the same with what's happening in alternative and smart protein. It's happening. It's just change the numbers a little.
Yeah, Manav mentioned earlier that one of the hurdles in the food tech industry is price. The cost is still kind of relatively high. So Sonali, do you have any kind of views on additional bottlenecks that's preventing the food tech industry to be where it should be?
Absolutely. And I think the biggest bottleneck is going to be, we need more government support across the board, because we need support at the education level. The other bottleneck is talent. A lot of these subsectors are incredibly deep tech, and they require support. So we require universities to be kind of awarded with grants and resources, so that they can really kind of train up students and attract students to get into this field, right? Then we need more regulatory support, right? We need frameworks that are clearer for plant-based, but also coming up for things like cell-based and precision fermentation products. And we need more, just financial support and kind of token support in terms of a spoken word. I mean, it was a huge moment for the industry a few months ago when President Xi basically called out alternative proteins as an important sector to help China with its decarbonization strategy and also with its food security strategy. So that connection really needed to be made, and it was made, and it's really put fire on the ground in China, which is fantastic, because arguably, that is probably the country that needs this industry the most, just because of the rising incomes and the rising demand for protein. So I would say the biggest hurdle is really is this kind of lapse between all the focus that we have on decarbonization, transportation, and energy, and even to some extent finance, but not as much of a focus on decarbonizing food, when food takes up, over 1/3 of all global emissions, and meat takes up 18% of that. So it's just, that would be that's the biggest hurdle I see.
Right. Manav, do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, so I think Sonali's right on, and I think framing it as a decarbonization solution is very important, because we're looking at and putting billions and going to spend hundreds of billions of dollars in decarbonization solutions, whether it's direct air capture or whatever other solutions that have permanent kind of GHG reduction potential. And alternate foods, or whatever we call this, is one of the best decarbonization solutions you can explore. In terms of bottlenecks, and I think these are opportunity sets or opportunity areas for Hong Kong and mainland China, we need a lot more kind of manufacturing, extrusion facilities. Corporates definitely need to work a little bit better with startups. There's a lot of very innovative startup corporates that are already starting to do that, but there's a lot of additional corporates in the room and kind of around this part of the world that have scope to get involved. That's definitely a role that we like to bridge in terms of how startups and corporates can kind of engage to leverage the distribution channels. And then I think a big part of, as I was talking about Gen 1 to Gen 2, a lot of the Gen 1 products perhaps are highly processed, and maybe the flavoring profiles are not there. So I think there's a lot of scope kind of the hospitality industry also to play a role. in helping these products be properly rolled out. And we're seeing a lot of this in Hong Kong, but we need a lot more of it. So we need a lot more of the large restaurant groups, whether they look at this as a CSR initiative, a decarbonization initiative, a sustainability initiative, an animal welfare issue, it doesn't matter. They got to roll these products out and use their strengths of their kitchens and their abilities to create great products, finished products, brand and marketing to actually get more people to try these products. And I think Hong Kong's always had such a thriving kind of food culture. This is a great opportunity for Hong Kong to really kind of lead the way there.
Absolutely.
Right.
I totally wanted to say that. We're one of the biggest foodie cities in the world. We have so many Michelin restaurants. We have the best chefs. We have innovative, diverse cuisines, and we have people that are very willing to try new things, which is a really special profile, And I don't know if you know, but I think other than Japan, we have the most. Okay, this was pre-COVID, but we have the most restaurants per capita in the world. So really just this thriving kind of dining out scene and such an opportunity for Hong Kong to be the leading food tech city in the region and potentially in the world. And there was actually a point right before COVID where we had more food tech brands in restaurants than anywhere else in the world. And I think we can get back to that now that, COVID is getting better. But we really need that support at all levels. Because at the end of the day, this is also about delicious, wonderful food, that nourishes us and that is exciting.
Yeah, and now we're bringing this whole entire topic back home here in Hong Kong. And as you mentioned, Sonali, we had a lot pre-COVID. Kind of access. I mean, a lot at the time is probably still not a lot in the general scheme of things. But for Hong Kong to play a role in the food tech industry, what else is required to help it scale even further and making Hong Kong as maybe a benchmark in Asia in kind of accepting food tech and alternative and smart protein? Maybe I'll give that to Sonali first.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some of the things we've already discussed. So more support around, regulatory frameworks going forward. Is there a way that, Hong Kong can have a role to play in like allowing the commercial sale of cultivated meat? Can we get some support from different government agencies on having what Manav referred to as a facility for like working with people like Bueller to do protein innovation centers here like they're doing in other cities in the world and allowing startups to come and test product without having to build a huge facility? That would be a big one, right? And can we get all the leading big restaurant groups together and the big hotel groups together and really provide some support and incentive for them to try these products out, because often they are a little bit more expensive than other things in their supply chain. So maybe there's some kind of, financial incentive or tax incentive, right? I mean, something that has been proposed across the world and is a hard sell, but is probably going to come in some form or another is a meat tax. So can we be more transparent on restaurant menus around the carbon emission footprint and the greenhouse emission footprint of a meal? And that really helps to differentiate the smart protein alternative as a positive alternative. And of course, the brands are trying to do this, but we really need the support at an industry level and at a government level. So there's quite a few things that can be done. And Manav and I are definitely, I'm volunteering you, we're available for kind of working through this and creating strategies. But there has to be this will to really, want to decarbonize the Hong Kong food system. I don't know if people know this, but we are the 7th worst greenhouse gas emitter per capita as a city in the world, and Hong Kongers eat more meat than anywhere else in the world and more seafood than anywhere else in the world. We don't win on beef, that's America, but we eat the most overall meat, including pork and chicken. So we as a city, we could do better. We do eat too much meat and seafood. I mean, this is a real stat. So, I think Can we also align health incentives? Can we also help, for example, can we work at school cafeteria levels? There's a lot going on in other countries where, a lot of the catering companies that like Compass and Sodexo that work with all the schools and universities, they're incentivized to really promote much more plant-based protein. And we could do this at a wider level across Hong Kong. These are things that are, fairly easy to implement. We have, tactical plans already as examples from other places. But the idea is, again, the support. Can we really decide to make Hong Kong, a food tech capital on the global stage? And I think the answer is yes.
Yeah, I
we
certainly
should.
hope so.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe I'll ask two more questions. The last question I'll ask is, give it some thought. Given the audience is going to go lunch soon, where's your favorite restaurant to get access to the sustainable food that we're looking for? So that's the one I will end with. But Manav, I think one of the questions that I wanted to kind of further dig a little bit is that some of my friends in the food industry mentions that their chefs have a difficult time in trying to accept alternative protein into fine dining. What do you think is required to start seeing more smart protein in fine dining, places?
I actually think the chefs who are in fine dining have an opportunity to really create very magical kind of creations and products because they're not worried about price, right? So price isn't the consideration. Let's use Singapore, for example. When Just rolled out their kind of cultivated chicken, they rolled out at 1880, which is one of the high-end kind of members clubs there. And they did an entire experience around, that rollout. And they had the chefs and, really packaged the product well. In Hong Kong, we have been in chats with numerous hospitality groups on the high end that are also quite motivated and are exploring this. And I don't think it's a single restaurant's job. I think there's a number of restaurants, as long as we agree on the narrative we've been discussing today, that decarbonization is required, sustainable solutions required, a better food system is required. Why can't we promote these restaurants for rolling these products out? Why can't a number of them come together and do weeks where, maybe for an entire week we're going green? And we reward that or incentivize that or provide tax benefits for that as a government or as a city. I think there's huge scope for that. And I think the chefs actually can play the best role in creating that awareness and rolling out really high quality products. And especially high end, they don't have to worry about price because people are already willing to pay it. In the US, there's Michelin star restaurants that only serve, non-meat meals and people are very happy to pay. So I think
we have them here too. In Ming Court is a Michelin-starred restaurant that has a variety of alternative protein options on their menu. I have to say, Ben, I have never seen chefs that reluctant. Maybe 1 or 2 out of 10. But actually, most chefs, if it's well presented to them and you give them the product and let them play with it, I mean, most of them, have families. They know where the world is going. They're creative people. They want it to be delicious, and they're going to be exacting on how they present it, which they should be. But the issue is often not that they don't want to. The issue is they just need space to kind of explore, and that's again where we need more support. So all the startups really need to be giving chefs samples and giving them and then training them, right? And Impossible is really the company that launched that playbook a few years ago when they started with David Chang from Momofuku. That's how they introduced the first Impossible Burger, and they showed what that playbook was. So it's a very successful one, and it can be replicated. I don't think that's a big reluctance.
No, 100%. And I think for us, what we're more excited about is how do you get more of the mass market? How do you get Maxims? How do you get those kind of groups a little bit more active in rolling this out because of the quantum and just volume of meat that they're purchasing, volume of meat that they're serving on a daily basis, 3 meals a day. That adds up. So I think there's a lot more scope there, and I think the entire industry has maybe set a target saying let's go 5% more in one direction, and then we'll move to 10%, then 15%. So I think we just need to see some more options on these menus, and that's the easiest way to start, and then start maybe discounting those options, promoting those options, and everyone can play a role, right? You're talking about 3 meals a day, right? So you're thinking about lunch. It's your potential now to actually make a change, just based on what you decide to eat after this.
Great, thank you.
You said
Well,
you wanted the favorite restaurants. I'm not going to choose a favorite because I have many. But what I will say, to talk about Manav's point, I thought one of the most successful and interesting rollouts was when Impossible debuted at MX Foods. So MX Foods, which is a Maxim chain, very, very budget friendly. They serve Impossible. It's really hard to argue with the fact that it's delicious, accessible, and well priced. So, I mean, this is happening. And I think probably Impossible has been the most successful brand in Hong Kong in terms of getting into as many restaurants and food service as possible. And I know that's because they have a really well executed playbook on how to do that. So there are options. They're out there and they're very
Great.
affordable.
Manav, do you have a spot that you like to recommend?
That's a tough question.
A lot of options.
There's a lot of good options, and honestly, I've never eaten meat in my life. I've never been to a restaurant where I can't find something that you can eat or ask for without the meat. So I think there's quite a few places you can go try out and still have really good food. I went to Chaiwala a couple days ago for work, and that was great, and I love Indian food, so maybe that's an option.
Great. All right, well, I think that's a good way for us to end this panel. I'd like to thank the audience for bearing with us, and I do hope that you've been able to garner more information about food technology and its upside, what it can really mean for Hong Kong. Thank you, Sonali and Manav, for your insights. And
Thank
for
you.
the audience, choose wisely when you have your lunch. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you once again to
Thank you so
Ben,
much.
Manav, and Sonali for the brilliant and wonderful discussion. Thank you so much.